January 6, 1944. 8th Air Force Main Office, High Wycombe, England. Major General Jimmy Doolittle stood in the room of Major General William Kepner, leader of the 8th Fighter Command, when a piece of writing on the wall caught his eye. A message hung clearly over Kepner's desk, its statement simple and plain. The most important job for 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the big bombers home alive. Doolittle read it 2 times, then turned to Kepner. "That sign must come down," he said softly. "It is wrong." Within hours, a different message took its place. The main job of 8th Air Force fighters is to destroy German fighters. This moment would become one of the most important new battle plans of World War II. Full switch in fighter rules that would crush the German Air Force in just weeks. What the bomber crews first called a death wish and what some officers labeled too risky would turn out to be the smartest move that won total control of the sky over Europe. The rules of air fighting were about to be completely changed, not just because of new machines, but because one general was willing to drop old rules for better outcomes. The big problem had been growing for months. On October 14, 1943, 291 American B-17 bombers flew the second attack on Schweinfurt, deep inside Germany. The target was vital, ball-bearing plants that made parts needed for German war work. The Americans reached the target and dropped their bombs with great accuracy. But the cost was awful. 60 bombers did not return. Another 17 were broken too badly to fix. 600 men died or went missing in one single afternoon. American bomber crews faced dangers that made finishing a needed 25-mission tour seem almost impossible. During the worst times in 1942 and 1943, the chances of survival dropped to between 25 and 35%. Lieutenant Robert Morgan, pilot of the famous Memphis Belle, one of the few crews to finish their tour, wrote in his notebook that night, "We are being slaughtered. The smaller planes turn back at the German border and we fly on alone into hell. The forts protect themselves well, but it is not enough. We need the fighters to come the whole way with us, or we need to stop flying." The German fighters had worked out ways to attack that were extremely deadly. They would gather together far away from the Allied escort planes, then attack in large groups. Before we continue, show your support by subscribing and letting me know where you're watching from. Head-on charges through the bomber lines, where speeds were over 600 miles per hour, gave American gunners only seconds to shoot back. Fighters with big 30mm cannons and air-to-air rockets could destroy a B-17 with one single hit. The problem was simple. American escort fighters, P-38s and P-47 Thunderbolts, could not fly far enough to go with the bombers to faraway targets. Over Schweinfurt, the protective fighters had turned back 300 miles from the target. The bombers went on alone, fighting for their lives against German fighters that could attack with no fear of trouble. General Henry Arnold, the main general of the United States Army Air Forces, gave a final demand in December 1943. Unless the German Air Force is destroyed, Operation Overlord, the planned landing in France cannot happen. American bombers cannot keep taking such heavy losses. Find a fix or the plan to bomb German factories ends. The fix arrived in November 1943 in the shape of a smooth silver fighter plane that would change everything. The North American P-51 Mustang, powered by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that made 1,695 horsepower in an emergency, had abilities that seemed almost too good to be true. With extra fuel tanks, the Mustang could fly with bombers 1,600 miles to any target in Germany and back. It flew at 437 miles per hour, faster than any German fighter. At high altitudes where the thin air slowed most engines, the Mustang's special supercharged Merlin worked perfectly. The fighter could climb to 41,000 feet and fight well at heights where Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulf struggled. Captain Chuck Yeager, flying P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group, wrote about the plane's effect in his battle report. "The P-51 is faster, climbs better, and turns sharper than anything the Germans have. For the first time, we have a plane that can go everywhere the bombers go and fight when we arrive. This changes everything, but having the range to fly with bombers all the way to the target was only half the answer." The way those escort planes were used would decide winning or losing. Under the old rules, fighters flew in tight groups around the lines of bombers, staying in sight of their protected planes at all times. If German fighters attacked, American escorts would fight them, but only long enough to chase them away before going back to the close group. The main focus was always staying safe. This focus on defense created a major flaw. German pilots could choose the exact time and place to attack. They gathered far out of sight, dove through the bomber group at top speed, caused major damage, then flew off before American fighters could truly fight back. The escort planes just reacted to what the Germans did, but never took charge. Major General Ira Eaker, the commander leaving the 8th Air Force, had made this defensive rule official. Eaker, a bomber pilot himself, honestly believed the bombers could defend themselves with their guns shooting in all directions. Fighters were there to help that protection, not replace it. Jimmy Doolittle saw the matter differently. Doolittle was not a bomber pilot. He was a fighter pilot, test flyer, and racing winner who had a high-level degree in airplane engineering from MIT. He understood how planes worked in ways few others did. Even more important, he understood how battle plans worked. The attack that made Doolittle famous, the April 18, 1942 strike on Tokyo by 16 B-25 bombers launched from the ship Hornet, had been bold, technically hard, and strategically brilliant. Doolittle had been given the Medal of Honor for personally leading that mission. Now he led the 8th Air Force with an order from General Arnold to solve the fighter problem. On January 6, 1944, his first full day in charge, Doolittle met with General Kepner and gave his groundbreaking command. Fighters were no longer to stay close to the bombers for safety. Instead, they would fly ahead of the bomber line, searching up to 50 miles forward and 25 miles to the side, actively hunting German fighters. After bombers finished their attacks and started for home, American fighters would not return with them. Instead, they would fly low across Germany, shooting up airfields, destroying planes on the ground, attacking trains and fuel tanks. The goal was not just to keep bombers safe, but to destroy the German Air Force entirely. The order shocked American fighter pilots and terrified bomber crews. Colonel Donald Blakesley, leader of the famous 4th Fighter Group, understood right away. "This is what we have been asking for," he told his pilots. "Freedom to hunt. We're no longer shepherds watching sheep. We are wolves." But Lieutenant Colonel Jim Howard, main planning officer of the 305th 4th Fighter Group, caught the bomber crew's view. "The men flying the forts and liberators think we are leaving them. They believe fighters leaving them alone to hunt Germans elsewhere is crazy. They do not get that killing German fighters before they reach the bombers is better protection than shooting them down after they attack." The bomber crew's worries were not foolish. They had survived missions only because fighters stayed nearby, driving off the attackers. Now those fighters would disappear over the horizon, leaving bombers seemingly without defense. Many crews believed Doolittle's order was a death sentence written by a general who did not understand their fight. The German reaction to the new American plans would show if Doolittle's risky move was right or wrong. For the German Air Force, the winter of 1943-44 had seemed like victory was coming in the air war. Even with 3 years of Allied bombing, German fighter production had actually gone up. Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf factories delivered more than 1,000 fighters each month. German pilots had figured out good ways to fight American groups. The heavily armed Sturmbach Focke-Wulf 190 fighters, carrying big cannons under their wings, could destroy bombers with one pass. These were guarded by faster Messerschmitt 109 fighters, whose job was to hold up American escorts while the Sturmbach planes killed the bombers. Major General Adolf Galland, leader of German fighter forces, believed the German Air Force was winning the war of wearing them down. In November 1943, he reported to Reich Marshal Hermann Goering that American bomber losses were too great to continue. "If we keep this pressure up," he wrote, "the Americans will have to stop bombing during the day by spring." But Galland's look at the facts missed one crucial thing. He focused on plane building numbers while ignoring pilot losses. Germany was building fighters faster than the Allies could destroy them on the ground or in plants. But Germany could not replace skilled pilots anywhere near the speed they were being killed in fights. In 1943, the German Air Force lost almost 3,000 fighter pilots killed, hurt, or missing. Training time for new pilots had been cut from 250 hours to 150 hours to meet the need. New German pilots were entering battle with barely enough skill to fly their planes, much less fight well against experienced American flyers. Warrant Officer Hans Dammers, a Messerschmitt 109 pilot with 8 wins, wrote to his brother in January 1944 describing the problem. "The new pilots last 3, maybe 4 missions before they are killed. They do not know how to dogfight. They cannot work with their wingmen. They freeze up when attacked. We older pilots must protect them while also fighting the Americans. It is becoming impossible." The bad weather in early 1944 held back the start of Doolittle's new battle plans. Winter storms kept bombers on the ground for days at a time. But on January 29th, when more than 800 bombers flew against Frankfurt, then new American fighter rules started. P-51 Mustangs from the 357th Fighter Group roared ahead of the bomber line at 28,000 feet, flying in spread-out groups that gave them the best view and reaction time. They were not tied to specific boxes of bombers. Instead, they hunted anywhere German fighters might show up. Near Bonn, the American fighters saw a group of 50 Messerschmitt 109s climbing to stop the bombers. Instead of waiting for the Germans to attack, the Mustangs dove on them. The Germans, expecting to attack bombers easily, suddenly found themselves fighting for their lives against fighters with better speed and height advantage. The fight lasted 8 minutes. 13 German fighters fell. 2 Mustangs were damaged, but both returned to base. The rest of the German group scattered and never reached the bombers. Captain Don Blakesley, leading the 4th Fighter Group on a similar flight that day, described the new plan's result. We caught 20 Focke-Wulfs gathering over Cologne. They were slow, weighed down with bullets and fuel, climbing to attack the bombers. We had speed, height, and surprise. It was a slaughter. We destroyed 11 before the others could get away. This is how you win a war. The bomber crews flying over Frankfurt that day noticed something special. German fighter attacks, which usually began far from the target and continued the whole time the bombs dropped, barely happened. A few small attacks occurred, but the large groups that had ruined past flights never appeared. The new fighter plans had stopped them first. But the real test came in February 1944 with Operation Argument, soon called Big Week. General Karl Spaatz, leading United States strategic air forces in Europe, planned the operation as a lure. American bombers would hit German plane factories and targets so important the German Air Force would have no choice but to fight hard to protect them. The goal was not mainly to destroy the factories, although that would help. The goal was to force the German Air Force into a big fight of killing and losing planes against American fighters that now had more planes, performed better, and outfought their German rivals. February 20th, 1944. Clear skies over Germany for the first time in weeks. Over 1,000 American bombers from England and Italy, guarded by hundreds of fighters, launched against 12 different aircraft production sites. This was the largest single-day air fleet in history. Major Erich Hartmann, Germany's top ace with 352 wins, watched the American group fly overhead and immediately understood what was going on. "This is not a bombing run," he told his group. "This is a fighter battle using bombers as the reason. They want us to come up and fight, and we must." The German Air Force responded with everything they had. Over 900 German fighters rushed up to stop the American groups. The sky over central Germany broke open into the biggest air battle ever. Smoke trails from thousands of planes crossed back and forth at all heights from the ground to 40,000 feet. But this time, American fighters were not stuck defensively near bomber groups. They flew across hundreds of miles of German sky, attacking German fighters wherever they found them. On the ground, taking off, lining up, going toward the bombers. The Mustangs and Thunderbolts hunted without stopping. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361st Fighter Group came upon a group of Messerschmitt 262 jets, Germany's amazing new fighter, taking off from a field near Leipzig. The jets were fast and deadly once in the air, but while taking off they were easy targets. Drew dove from 30,000 feet, screaming through anti-aircraft fire, and opened fire on the lead jet as it lifted off the runway. The jet exploded. He destroyed a second jet before it could speed up. The other jets scattered. Drew's battle report became famous. "The jets are dangerous in the air, but they must take off and land like any airplane. Catch them there and they burn like any other." The first day of Big Week cost the Americans 21 bombers and 4 fighters. Compared to Schweinfurt 3 months earlier, this was a great result. But German losses were awful. Over 50 fighters were destroyed. More importantly, 38 pilots were killed or badly hurt. For the next 5 days, when the weather allowed, the attacks kept going. American bombers hit Regensburg, Brunswick, Schweinfurt again, Gotha, Augsburg. Each raid brought hundreds of bombers and fighters. Each raid forced the German Air Force to fight back. Each raid cost Germany fighters and pilots it could not replace. Major Heinz Baer, a German ace with over 220 wins, wrote about the hopeless situation in his journal. We shoot down bombers, but the fighters are everywhere. We form up and they attack us before we can attack. We land to get fuel and they shoot up the airfield. We take off and they are waiting. There is no escape. For every bomber we destroy, we lose 2 fighters and pilots. By February 25th, when Big Week finished, the numbers told the story. American losses: 226 heavy bombers, 28 escort fighters, about 2,600 people hurt or killed. These were serious losses, but American building and training replaced them within a month. German losses: over 350 fighters destroyed, another 92 damaged to be fixed. Even worse, the German Air Force lost nearly 100 pilots killed, over 50 badly hurt. These pilots had an average of over 3 years of battle experience. They could not be replaced. Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Ehlefeld, leader of a Jagdgeschwader fighter wing, wrote in his report to Galland, "We are losing the most skilled men. The new pilots cannot survive against the American fighters. Within 3 months we will have planes, but no one able to fly them in combat." But Doolittle's plan went beyond air fighting. The second part of his command, shooting up German airfields and roads, was just as damaging. Every day, as American fighters came back from escort flights, they would fly low and attack targets of opportunity across Germany. Airfields were especially hard hit. Planes parked out in the open, aircraft being fixed, fuel trucks, hangars, all became targets. German pilots talked about returning from missions to find their home airfields under attack, forced to land at different bases or come down while planes were shooting at the runway. Major Günther Rall, a German Air Force ace with 275 wins, talked about the mental toll. We used to feel safe on our own airfields. Nowhere is safe. The Americans attack morning, noon, and evening. Pilots live through a battle only to die on the ground. Mechanics are killed working on planes. Fuel trucks blow up. We cannot keep working while under constant attack. The total effect started showing in March 1944, when the 8th Air Force launched its first big attacks on Berlin itself. On March 6th, 730 bombers guarded by 800 fighters hit the German capital. The meaning and importance of Berlin meant the German Air Force had to fight back with everything it had. They did. Over 150 German fighters fought the American groups. The resulting battle spread across hundreds of miles as fighters fought while bombers pushed toward their targets. When the count was finished, the Americans had lost 69 bombers and 11 fighters. The Germans lost 160 planes destroyed and another 50 damaged. The pilot losses were shocking. Nearly 70 skilled fighter pilots killed or wounded in one day. For the German Air Force, it was a disaster they could not fix. Captain Johannes Wiese, group leader of 1st Group Jagdgeschwader 52, lived through the March 6th battle and wrote that evening, "Today I saw the German fighter arm die. We threw everything we had at them and it was not enough. They shot us down faster than we could shoot them down. Their losses are temporary. Ours are forever. The war is lost." Between January and May 1944, the ongoing losses became too much for the German Air Force to handle. German fighter pilot losses went over 1,000 men killed, wounded, or missing. This meant almost 1/4 of all fighter pilots available at the start of that time. Even worse, the losses hurt the most experienced pilots the hardest. The veterans, the men with many wins, the squadron and group leaders, the teachers, were systematically killed. They died because they were the most daring, because they led the way, because they tried to protect the new, less experienced flyers. 28 German aces with over 30 kills died between January and May. 8 aces with over 100 kills were killed or captured. Each of these men stood for years of training and battle skill. Each was truly irreplaceable. The training system could not keep up. In 1944, Germany put 29,000 new fighter pilots through school, but training time had fallen to only 110 hours of total flight time by mid-year. With some late war pilots getting as little as 50 hours, American pilots in the same time received over 450 hours of training, including 250 hours in their combat planes. Major Hans Philipp, a German ace with 206 wins, described the new pilot situation in his final letter home before being killed in action in October 1943. "The boys come to the squadron unable to fly in formation correctly. They do not understand battle principles. They panic when shot at. In combat with experienced American pilots flying better planes, they survive 1, maybe 2 missions, then they die. We cannot teach them fast enough. There is no time." The difference in plane building told another part of the story. In the first 6 months of 1944, American factories produced over 22,000 fighter planes, German factories, even with efforts to spread out to avoid bombing, produced 9,000 fighters. The sheer number of planes alone was huge, but the better quality made the difference absolute. The P-51 Mustang was simply better than the Messerschmitt 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 in most battle situations. It was faster, had greater range, better high-altitude performance, and the same or better turning ability. Colonel Hubert Zemke, leader of the 56th Fighter Group flying P-47 Thunderbolts, noted the combined effect. We have more fighters, better trained pilots, better plans, and endless fuel and bullets. The Germans have brave men flying decent planes they cannot keep supplied or properly maintained. Bravery cannot beat such odds forever. By April 1944, the great change was done. German fighter strength, counting flyable planes and pilots, had fallen to less than 60% of January levels. More importantly, the skill level of the force had dropped terribly. The groups of skilled pilots that had crushed bomber raids in October 1943 no longer existed. The new German Air Force was mostly made up of pilots with no experience flying planes with too little fuel, not enough bullets, and minimal maintenance. They faced American groups that grew bigger and more sure of themselves with every flight. On May 8, 1944, the 8th Air Force sent out almost 900 bombers to attack oil factories and train yards across Germany. Over 750 escort fighters went with them. Not one single German fighter rose to stop them. The German Air Force for the first time gave up the sky without a fight. General Galland reported to Goering that day, "The fighter force is destroyed. We have planes but cannot fly them for lack of fuel. We have pilots but most cannot fight well. The Americans attack when they wish. We can no longer challenge their control of the air." The huge change became clear on June 6, 1944, D-Day. Allied air forces flew over 14,000 times on the first day of the invasion. German Air Force fighters flew fewer than 300 times. This big difference let Allied ground attack planes destroy German positions, while bombers blocked off the battle area. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, leading German forces in France, sent an urgent message to his wife on June 10th. "The enemy has complete control of the air. Our troops cannot move in the daytime without being attacked. Our supplies cannot reach the front lines. Without air cover, we cannot hold the landing beaches." The change from October 1943 to June 1944 was incredible. 6 months earlier, the German Air Force had seemed likely to stop the American bomber campaign by bleeding it to death. Now they were pretty much gone as a fighting force over Western Europe. The numbers from those important 6 months show a story of total destruction. Between January and June 1944, the German Air Force lost over 2,500 fighter pilots killed or badly hurt in battle over the German Reich. This was about 75% of the available fighter pilot force at the start of the time. American losses in the same time added up to about 420 fighter pilots killed or missing, and 7,000 bomber crew hurt, killed, or captured. These losses were serious but manageable, given American training ability and plane production. The kill rates had reversed completely. In October 1943, German fighters had been destroying American bombers at a rate of 20 for every German fighter lost. By May 1944, American fighters were destroying German fighters at a rate of 4 to 1. But beyond the numbers, the mental change was just as complete. German pilots who had entered 1944 sure of winning now flew missions expecting to die. American pilots who had been afraid of German fighters now chased them hard. Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who ended the war with about 20 air victories, described the difference. "In January, we were happy when the Germans did not attack. By March, we were upset when they flew away. By May, we were annoyed because there were so few left to fight. The change was total. The success of Doolittle's plan proved his risky move was right, but it created an interesting historical twist. His decision, at first opposed by many bomber commanders as recklessly leaving them alone, had actually saved the bombing campaign. By destroying German fighters before they could attack bombers, aggressive fighter plans proved to protect better than defensive escorts ever could. General Spaatz agreed with this in a June 1944 report. General Doolittle's decision to let the fighters loose was the main reason for winning air control. "We destroyed more German fighters in 4 months than in the previous 2 years. The key was allowing fighters to hunt rather than forcing them to protect." Major General Frederick Anderson, who had taken Eaker's place as commander of bomber operations, admitted his first opposition had been wrong. "I believed keeping fighters close to bombers was the only way to protect them. I was wrong. Killing enemy fighters before they attack is much more effective than killing them during attacks. General Doolittle understood this. I did not. The complete change in battle plans went beyond just rules to fully changing how air warfare was thought about. Before Doolittle's January command, escort fighters were seen as a side help to the bombers' defense guns. After Big Week, fighters were understood as the main weapon for getting air control, with bombers serving partly as bait to draw enemy fighters into a fight. This understanding would shape Air Force rules for decades. The Korean War, Vietnam War, and every battle since would use lessons from early 1944. Control of the air comes from destroying enemy fighters first, not from protecting friendly planes second, but the human cost of the plan stayed high. Over 10,000 American airmen died in Theskys over Europe in the first half of 1944. The bomber crews who flew missions, day after day knowing each flight might be their last, showed amazing courage. The fighter pilots who accepted the job of hunting German fighters deep over enemy land showed remarkable skill and aggression. Lieutenant Robert Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group, who lived to become the second highest scoring American ace in Europe with 27 wins, thought about the cost years later. We talk about plans and moves and numbers, but what really happened was thousands of young men climbed into planes every day and flew into battle, knowing many would not come back. We won because we had more courage, more skill, better planes, better plans, and better leaders. We won because Jimmy Doolittle understood that protecting bombers meant killing fighters, not staying close to bombers. By August 1944, the German Air Force fighter arm had basically stopped existing. ASA Unified Defense Group. Single groups kept fighting with great courage and sometimes had success. New jet planes, the Messerschmitt 262, showed great future potential, but the total destruction of the pilot force in the first half of the year could not be undone. Germany produced over 36,000 fighters in 1944, the highest yearly total of the war, but there were not enough trained pilots to fly them, not enough fuel to train the pilots they had, not enough experienced leaders to make good plans, and not enough time to rebuild what had been lost. Captain Erich Rudorfer, one of the few German aces to survive the war with over 220 wins, summed up the situation. We had plenty of planes by late 1944. Modern fighters, even jets, but we had no experienced pilots to fly them. The Americans had killed all the good pilots in the spring. The war was already lost by the time we made the most planes. The success of Doolittle's plan created a model for modern air fighting that is still important today. Control of the air cannot be won by staying on defense. It needs hard attack action against enemy planes and military buildings. New technology matters. The quality of training matters more. Having more plans is only key when mixed with having better quality. Perhaps most importantly, leadership willing to go against normal rules and accept risk can produce battle outcomes far better than small changes to old ways. Doolittle's choice to change the sign on Kepner's wall was not just symbolic. It showed a complete new way of thinking about how to use fighters. The bomber crews who first feared Doolittle's plan as leaving them alone came to understand and respect the idea. Technical Sergeant Andy Rooney, a Stars and Stripes reporter who flew bombing missions to cover the air war, wrote in June 1944, "The fighter pilots saved us by leaving us. This sounds strange, but it is true. When they flew close, the Germans attacked anyway. When they flew ahead and hunted, the Germans could not reach us. The best defense was a good attack." General Doolittle understood this. Waited not. He was right. By the time of the Normandy landing, Allied Air Force had won total air control over Western Europe. German planes still flew, but in such small numbers with such little effect that they could not truly fight Allied air operations. The invasion worked mainly because soldiers could fight without fear of enemy planes attacking them. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, said this in his report after the invasion. "The air forces gave us the one thing we needed to succeed. They gave us freedom to work without enemy air getting in the way." General Doolittle's fighter plans destroyed the German Air Force when that destruction was absolutely necessary. History will see this as one of the key campaigns of the war. The change from October 1943 to June 1944 is one of the most dramatic turnarounds in military history. In October, the German Air Force was winning the war of attrition over Germany. American bomber losses were too much to handle. The plan to bomb German factories seemed to be failing. 6 months later, the German Air Force was crushed. American bombers flew with very few losses, and Allied ground forces got ready to invade France under total air cover. The change was so complete and so fast that German commanders struggled to figure out what had happened. General Galland in his writings after the war named the turning point exactly. When the Americans changed their fighter plans in January 1944, they won their war. We could fight American bombers. We could not fight their fighters and their bombers at the same time. Once they let the fighters hunt us, we were finished. The end was simply a matter of time. The final numbers of the campaign show its complete success. Between January and December 1944, the German Air Force lost over 4,000 fighter pilots killed in action over the German Reich. American and British fighters destroyed over 11,000 German fighters in air fights and on the ground. German fighter pilot training time fell from 200 hours in 1943 to less than 100 hours by late 1944. American losses in the same time added up to about 750 fighter pilots and 16,000 bomber crew hurt, killed, or captured. These were big losses, but American training schools graduated over 35,000 new pilots in 1944, and American factories produced over 63,000 military planes. The kill rate in air fighting switched completely. In 1943, German Air Force fighters had won about 1.2 kills for every loss. In 1944, the rate flipped to American fighters winning 3.7 kills for every loss. By 1945, the rate was over 7-1. But perhaps the most clear number was pilot skill levels. In January 1944, the average German fighter pilot had over 200 hours of battle experience. By January 1945, the average was under 50 hours. The German Air Force had not run out of planes or fuel, though both were scarce. It had run out of trained pilots able to fight well. Doolittle's controversial decision had done exactly what General Arnold asked for. It destroyed the German Air Force as a real fighting force before the Normandy landing. It showed that hard attack fighter plans were better than defensive escort plans. It proved that winning air control required killing enemy fighters, not just protecting friendly bombers. The human cost was great. Over 26,000 American airmen died in the skies over Europe during World War II. More deaths than the entire United States Marine Corps suffered in the Pacific. The 8th Air Force alone had over 47,000 people hurt or killed. These men achieved air control through bravery, skill, and giving everything they had. For the German fighter pilots, the campaign was awful. Thousands of young men, many still teenagers, climbed into cockpits knowing they would probably not survive. They fought with bravery and skill against huge odds until death took them. The aces, the veterans, the group leaders nearly all died in battle or were captured. Few lived through the war. Major Erich Hartmann, the war's top ace with 352 wins, survived only because he fought mostly on the Eastern Front. After the war, he acknowledged what had happened in the West. The Americans destroyed the fighter force over Germany in 1944. They had better planes, more planes, better trained pilots, and smarter plans. We fought bravely, but we were overwhelmed. General Doolittle's plan was brilliant. It cost us everything. In January 1944, when Doolittle ordered that sign changed in Kepner's office, many thought it was crazy. By June, it was seen as genius. The main job of fighters was indeed to destroy enemy fighters. Everything else came from that idea. The Berlin attacks, the destruction of German buildings and roads, the protection of ground forces during the invasion, all became possible because American fighters had completely destroyed the German Air Force in 4 months of intense fighting. What had seemed too risky turned out to be the only way to win. 70 years later, when military writers look at the air campaign over Europe, they always name Doolittle's January command as the turning point. One decision, one change in plans, one general's willingness to go against the rules changed the air war completely. The bombers returned safely, not because fighters stayed close to them, but because fighters destroyed German fighters before they could attack. The strange truth that attacking gives better protection than defending became the rule. Air forces worldwide learned the lesson. Control of the air comes from destroying enemy planes hard and fast, not from protecting friendly planes gently. Lieutenant General James Doolittle left the Air Force in 1946, having led the 8th Air Force, 15th Air Force, and 12th Air Force during the war. He received many awards, including the Medal of Honor, many distinguished service medals, and honorary knighthood from Britain. But of all his accomplishments, he considered the fighter command his most important decision. In a 1970s interview, Doolittle looked back on that January day. Changing the fighter plans was the hardest decision I made. Bomber commanders were against it. Bomber crews were afraid of it. Some fighter pilots thought it was a death wish, but I knew from my own time as a fighter pilot that attacking wins air battles. You cannot win by defending. You win by attacking. The losses were terrible, but they would have been worse under defensive plans. We won because we took the risk and attacked hard. The sign that Doolittle ordered taken down from Kepner's wall in January 1944 now sits in the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. Next to it hangs the new sign. Together they tell the story of a battle plan change that won control of the air in Europe. For bomber crews who lived through the war, many gave Doolittle's decision credit for their survival. They had first been against the change, thinking fighters leaving them to hunt Germans elsewhere was abandoning them. Experience taught them the opposite. The best way to protect bombers was to destroy enemy fighters before they could attack. For the German Air Force, Doolittle's command was the start of the end. In October 1943, they had been winning the air war of attrition. 6 months later, they were destroyed as an effective force. The combination of American numerical advantage, better technology, high-quality training, and aggressive plans proved overwhelming. The campaign from January to June 1944 shows military rules that are still true today. Attacking beats defending when both sides are roughly similar in ability. Better training makes better results even when outnumbered. Better technology mixed with smart battle changes creates absolute superiority. Leadership willing to go against the rules and accept risk achieves big battle results. But most importantly, winning air control requires destroying enemy fighters, not protecting friendly planes. This strange truth, understood by Doolittle and proven in battle over Germany in 1944, remains the basis of air combat rules worldwide. The story of how one general's order to change a sign on a wall led to the destruction of the German Air Force in weeks is finally a story about understanding the true nature of air fighting. Doolittle understood that fighters are attack planes whose main job is killing enemy fighters. Using them for defense wasted their power and gave the advantage to the enemy. The bomber crews who first feared his plans came to understand their wisdom. The German pilots who fought those plans learned how effective they were too late. And military flying learned lessons that would shape air warfare for generations. On June 6, 1944, when Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy under clear skies free of German planes, the success of Doolittle's plan was complete. The German Air Force, which had scared Europe for 5 years, which had destroyed air forces from Poland to France, which had bombed London into rubble, was nowhere to be seen. American and British fighters had hunted them until they were gone. A single change in plan, a single change in rules, one general's willingness to go against accepted wisdom had achieved what years of bombing could not. The German Air Force was destroyed not by attacking factories, but by attacking fighters, not by protecting bombers but by hunting aggressively, not by playing defense but by seizing the attack. The sign came down on January 6, 1944. 6 months later, the German Air Force was finished. The link between those two events is direct, measurable, and impossible to deny. One general's risky plan had destroyed the enemy air force in weeks, won control of the air over Europe, and guaranteed the success of the invasion that would free the continent. History would judge Jimmy Doolittle's decision to change fighter plans as one of the most important command choices of World War II. Not because it was tricky or technically advanced, but because it was basically right. The main job of fighters is to destroy enemy fighters.